Have you ever wondered how deeply someone has to stop loving you to sell the home you built together while you're lying in bed, too weak to even stand? My name is Mateo. I'm 48 years old, and for most of my life, I believed in building things that last: homes, businesses, relationships. But the day I woke up from a high fever and found out my wife had tried to sell our house behind my back, something shifted forever. It wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated, strategic, and heartless. At the time, I'd been sick for months. A rare autoimmune condition had left me nearly immobilized. I depended on Lucía, my wife of nearly 15 years, for everything. She brought me meals, helped with meds, even smiled through the worst of it. Or so I thought. Until the day her tone changed, cold, sharp, businesslike. "The papers are already signed," she said. "We've sold the house. I'm moving out, with someone new." I couldn't even sit up, but I could listen, and I could remember. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing too, and what followed would change both our lives forever. If this story makes you feel something, anger, curiosity, even quiet rage, then stay with me. And if you've ever rebuilt yourself after betrayal, leave a comment. Subscribe. You're not alone. Before everything fell apart, I was just a man trying to build something real. My name is Mateo Vargas. I had spent over 2 decades of my life building a custom carpentry business from scratch in Mexico City. From the dust of old warehouses and forgotten furniture, I created elegant pieces that people could pass down through generations. My hands were my pride. My name meant something in my field. Clients trusted me. Partners respected me. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, rooted. The kind of man who believed that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and loved deeply, you'd be safe. Lucía came into my life when I was 33. She was a bright spark working in a mid-sized advertising agency, sharp as a blade, full of charm. She spoke with confidence, moved like she had somewhere important to be, and looked at me like I was someone worth betting on. She told me once during our second date that what she admired most was how I could turn old wood into something meaningful. I thought that was poetry. I believed it meant she saw me. We married a year and a half later, bought a 1950s colonial-style house in Coyoacán, just outside the noise of the city, but close enough to walk to the markets. It needed work, plumbing, paint, new floors. But we saw potential. We spent weekends sanding door frames, shopping for antique tiles, turning bare rooms into cozy spaces filled with light and laughter. For 10 years, we grew a life together inside those walls. Lucía was always the planner. She managed the bills, took charge of the documents, reminded me about the taxes. I trusted her completely. And maybe in hindsight, that's where I made my first mistake, not in loving her, but in believing that love alone was enough to guarantee loyalty. The early years were good. We laughed easily, took trips when we could build traditions, Sunday coffee on the terrace, handwritten notes before business trips. She even helped me with my bookkeeping when my business expanded. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Or so I thought. What I didn't see back then were the hairline cracks, the subtle moments where admiration turned into resentment, where presence turned into performance. When I think back now, I don't remember the fights. We didn't have many. I remember the silences, the long, quiet looks, the pauses that held more truth than any word she ever said. And beneath it all, the house. Our house. The one I never thought she'd dare try to steal. It started with fatigue. At first I chalked it up to age or stress, long days in the workshop, late nights drafting quotes for clients. But then came the fevers, the dizzy spells, the sharp pain in my joints that wouldn't go away. Within 2 months I went from working full-time to lying in bed, barely able to hold a spoon. The doctors were confused at first. Blood tests, scanned specialists. Eventually, the diagnosis came: a rare autoimmune disorder, aggressive and slow to respond to treatment. I was told to rest, to avoid stress, to prepare for a long road. Lucía was supportive in the beginning, or at least she played the part. She made me soups, bought vitamins, organized my prescriptions into little plastic boxes with labels for each day of the week. She said all the right things. You'll be back on your feet in no time. We'll get through this together. But I noticed something different in her eyes. Not concern, not fear, boredom, resentment maybe. The warmth was gone, replaced by a kind of mechanical kindness. The motions were there, but the meaning behind them had vanished. She stopped sleeping in our bedroom within the first month, said I snored too much, that I moved around too much in my sleep. I didn't fight it. I was too tired. Then came the absences, yoga classes that ran late, errands that took hours, cousins who suddenly needed help moving. She came home smelling different new shampoo, strange cologne lingering on her clothes. The makeup got heavier, the smiles grew rehearsed, and our house felt colder. What cut the deepest wasn't the distance. It was how quickly she adapted to my decline. As if my illness wasn't just inconvenient, it was a burden she hadn't signed up for. She stopped asking how I felt. She started talking about taking control of the situation, asking me to sign new documents. Small things, she said. Financial updates, tax restructuring. One of them, she told me gently, was to temporarily put the house in her name just in case something happened to me. My body was too weak to argue, but my instincts were not. I asked her to leave the documents on the table. I'd review them later. She didn't like that answer. I spent most of those days lying on the same couch we had chosen together 10 years ago, looking out at the terrace we tiled by hand, listening to the house shift around me. But it wasn't ours anymore. It felt like a stranger's house. And every time she walked through the door with that distracted smile, I felt one step closer to being erased. That was the moment I realized if I didn't protect myself now, there might not be anything left to protect. Despite the haze of medication and fatigue, my mind remained sharp, maybe even sharper than before, focused, stripped of distraction. And what I began to see day by day was a pattern I could no longer explain away with kindness. Lucía had always been efficient, but now she was secretive. She'd step outside to take calls, her voice dropping low behind the sliding glass door. Once I heard laughter, warm, flirty, not the kind she used with me. When I asked who it was, she waved me off. Just a friend from the agency, she said. You wouldn't know him. I let it slide. But I remembered the way her shoulders tensed before she answered. She began locking her phone. New passwords, new apps? She got defensive when I asked her why we suddenly had 2 separate bank accounts. It's just easier for taxes, she said, with you not working right now. But the numbers didn't add up. Charges to restaurants we never visited. ATM withdrawals in neighborhoods we never frequented. I was sick, but I wasn't blind. One night after she left for another yoga intensive, I struggled to my desk. I still had access to our shared cloud storage. Lucía had forgotten to log out on the desktop. I opened the folder labeled Documents. Inside were scans of property transfer forms, my name, my signature, or something that looked close enough. My chest tightened. I printed everything I could and stashed the copies in a binder I hid in the workshop beneath old blueprints. It was then I called Álvaro, my attorney and oldest friend. We'd built our businesses side by side. He handled all my contracts, my taxes, my legal work. He came over the next morning and found me pale, exhausted, but furious. I told him everything, showed him the documents, the fake signatures, the hidden expenses. He said only one sentence. We need to act now, quietly. Over the next week, Álvaro helped me set up digital alerts with the notary registry. If Lucía attempted any transaction involving the house, we'd know immediately. We froze major withdrawals from our joint accounts. Quietly, he began documenting everything, time-stamped files, voice memos, security camera backups. He even installed a small recording device in the office drawer where Lucía kept her folders. Meanwhile, I played dumb, smiled when she brought soup, nodded when she said she'd be out late again. Every time she walked past the couch, confident I was slipping deeper into weakness, I watched, I listened, I prepared. Lucía didn't know that while she was trying to erase me, I was already tracing her steps. She believed I was too weak to notice, but the truth was I noticed everything. The more time passed, the more I realized something inside Lucía had shifted, and not in a way that could be explained by stress or exhaustion. It was in the details, the kinds of details you only notice when you're no longer distracted by routine. Lying in bed for days, I had nothing but time and silence. And silence, if you let it, reveals everything. She became impatient with small things, the way I asked her to adjust my pillows, the tone I used when reminding her about my medication. Her smile, once spontaneous and warm, now flickered like a light that couldn't decide whether to stay on. She'd leave in the morning wearing makeup she hadn't worn in years, clothes I didn't recognize. And when she returned, she always smelled faintly of something expensive and unfamiliar. Not just cologne aftershave, one I would never buy. I remember the first time I truly knew something was wrong. She left her phone charging in the kitchen while she took a shower. It lit up with a message preview, "Same time tomorrow." The name was saved as Yoga M. No last name, no emoji. Just 3 words that unraveled everything I had been trying to deny. When she saw me near her phone later that evening, her body stiffened. "Don't go through my stuff," she said. "I need privacy too." Privacy. After 15 years of sharing every bill, every meal, every plan. Later that week, she brought me a folder and casually mentioned that we needed to streamline the property paperwork, that her accountant said it would be safer to have the house in her name temporarily in case anything happened to me. "It's just a precaution," she said. "If your illness gets worse, we don't want the house tied up in probate." My instincts screamed. I told her I'd think about it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The next morning, I called Alvaro. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to raise a flag. He didn't ask many questions. He just said, "Let me look into a few things for you." By the end of the day, he'd already uncovered a quiet title search under Lucía's name, filed with a third-party property consultant. She hadn't even waited. She was laying the groundwork, assuming I'd be too weak or too trusting to notice. That same night, I began writing things down. Dates, times, phrases she used. I placed a small notebook under the cushion of the armchair where I slept. Every morning before she left, I noted how long she was gone, what she wore, who she claimed to be meeting. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, that the illness was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Lucía wasn't drifting away. She was exiting quietly, carefully, making sure the door wouldn't creak as she slipped through it. But what she didn't realize was this: I had already started locking the other doors behind her. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was gray, the kind of low, silent gray that presses down on everything. I was dozing in and out on the couch when I heard unfamiliar voices drifting in from the entryway. Not Lucía's usual half-whispers. These were firm, professional. A man and a woman, papers shuffling, something heavy being set on the console table near the door. I forced myself to stay still, my breath shallow. The woman spoke first. "Is your husband able to sign today?" Lucía's voice followed, calm, controlled, practiced. "Yes, he's just very tired. I'll bring the forms to him and I'll help guide his hand." My pulse spiked. That sentence, "guide his hand," it chilled me. I heard her footsteps as she entered the living room with a clipboard in hand and a pen already clicked open. She smiled. That same fake, distant smile I'd grown used to. "Sweetheart," she said, crouching beside me, "we need to sign a couple of medical release forms, just some insurance updates. Nothing serious." I didn't respond. I just stared at her. She reached for my hand, trying to position the pen between my fingers. I let it rest there, unmoving. Her smile faltered. "You trust me, right?" she whispered. Before I could answer, Alvaro's voice echoed from the hallway. "Lucía." She turned white. Alvaro stepped into the room holding a folder. Behind him was a uniformed officer and a notary from the district office, the real notary. The man Lucía had brought was not on any legal registry. He was a private broker, hired to push through paperwork quickly and discreetly, something Alvaro had uncovered 2 days earlier. He had arrived minutes before them, tipped off by an alert from the registry. She had triggered the notification by attempting to file a property transfer. "What is this?" Lucía asked, standing abruptly, her tone shifting from sugar to steel. "You ambushed me." Alvaro handed her a cease and desist letter. "You forged a legal signature, attempted to transfer property without consent, and impersonated my client during recovery. That's fraud, Lucía, on multiple levels." The officer stepped forward, calm but firm. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe you attempted to execute a transaction under false pretenses. We'll need you to step aside while we review your identification and the forms in question." Lucía's face contorted into something between rage and panic. "This is ridiculous. He's sick. He doesn't understand what he's signing." "I understand perfectly," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken all morning. My voice was hoarse but steady. "You tried to sell the house I built, while I was too weak to fight back." She turned to me, tears welling, but I saw no remorse, only fear that she had failed. The officer escorted her into the hallway for questioning. Alvaro sat beside me, opened his folder, and began checking off documents. The forged forms, the hidden account transfers, the security recordings from the home office. Everything was documented, time-stamped, and aligned. Lucía thought she was sealing her freedom. What she'd really done was sign her downfall. Part 6. The Plan. She didn't see coming 600 words. The day after Lucía's failed attempt to sell the house, I asked Alvaro to bring me everything, every email, every document, every recording. I wanted to see the full picture. Not because I doubted her betrayal anymore, those illusions had died the moment she tried to force a pen into my hand, but because I needed to understand just how calculated it all had been. What I saw shocked me. She'd been preparing this for months, hidden bank accounts in her maiden name, credit cards I'd never authorized, a P.O. box registered to a company I'd never heard of. The yoga instructor she always mentioned. He was a freelance broker known for helping people liquidate assets quickly, no questions asked. That's who she brought into our home disguised as a notary. The paper trail told a story Lucía hadn't just lost faith in our marriage, she had been actively dismantling it while I lay sick in bed. She had already taken a partial deposit from the buyers, telling them I was unable to sign, but that power of attorney would be provided. What she didn't know was that months earlier, after one of our quietest fights, I had already begun preparing for the worst. See, before the illness struck, something had shifted in Lucía's energy, a distance that couldn't be explained by stress or work. I'd heard her on a phone call one evening, her voice soft different. When she noticed I was listening, she said it was her sister. But it wasn't. I knew that. So I had visited Alvaro, told him I wanted to restructure our financial protections just in case. We created a private trust that made me the sole legal owner of the house. Any transaction required dual biometric verification. I hadn't told Lucía. I didn't want to start a war. I just wanted to be prepared for the storm I was beginning to feel gather at the edges. And when I got sick, Alvaro and I agreed on one more layer, an advanced healthcare directive. It gave me sole control over property matters, even while under medical supervision. A legal firewall against exactly what Lucía tried to do. But the smartest move I made wasn't legal. It was human. I reached out to my cousin Diego, a quiet guy, former systems engineer, who came over under the guise of installing a backup modem. In reality, he helped me place motion-triggered cameras in key areas of the house, the office, the hallway, even the small drawer where Lucía kept her private folders. We encrypted everything and backed it up to a private server Alvaro could access. Every forged document she touched, every whispered call she made, every moment she paced the hallway, rehearsing her story, it was all on record. Lucía thought I was asleep when she practiced how she'd tell the notary I was lucid enough to understand. She thought I was out of it when she opened the drawer and took out my ID. She had no idea I was documenting everything from a place of silence. The irony is, I never wanted it to come to this. I didn't set traps because I wanted to punish her. I set them because I knew that if she chose betrayal, I had to choose truth. And in the end, it wasn't my illness that made me vulnerable. It was her underestimating how far a quiet man will go when he's forced to protect what he's built. Part 7. The Confrontation, 700 Words. 2 weeks after the failed signing attempt, I finally stood on my own. The illness hadn't disappeared, but the worst had passed. I was shaky slower than before, but alive in a new way, like the fog had lifted. Alvaro said the investigation was moving forward, but I asked him to pause the formal proceedings for 48 hours. I needed to see her face. Not through lawyers, not in a courtroom. Face to face. One last time. That Sunday afternoon, Lucía came home around 4 p.m. I was already waiting in the living room, fully dressed, sitting upright in the armchair beneath the window. The light was low, and for a moment when she opened the door and saw me, she froze. Then she smiled. "You're up," she said a little too casually. "That's good." I didn't smile back. "We need to talk." She hesitated. "Can it wait? I have someone dropping by just for a moment." A knock came at the door, almost as if on cue. I didn't move. She opened it and let in a man I'd never seen in person, but whose name I already knew. Martín. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who probably thought charm could solve anything. He gave me a nod like I was a guest in my own house. "You must be Mateo," he said, extending his hand. I looked at it, but didn't take it. "You're wearing my slippers," I said quietly. He looked down, confused. "Those belong to my father. He died in them. Take them off." Martín looked to Lucía for help, but she said nothing. Slowly, awkwardly, he bent down and removed the slippers, placing them by the door. I stood, my body still fragile, but my voice steady. "Lucía, this house is not for sale. And you don't live here anymore," she scoffed. "Excuse me." I walked to the dining table and pulled out a folder. Inside were printouts of the fake signatures, security camera stills of her meeting with the fake notary, and screenshots of her messages to Martín. I placed them one by one on the table like cards in a final game. You lied. You tried to steal. You forged documents and attempted to commit property fraud. You brought a stranger into our home and wore your betrayal like perfume. Martín looked at the evidence, his face draining. "You didn't tell me it was like this," he muttered. I didn't know he'd Lucía started, but her voice cracked. "You didn't think I'd recover. You thought I'd fade quietly and you'd walk away with everything." She looked at me, fury in her eyes now. "You're going to destroy me?" I tilted my head. "You already did that to yourself." Martín was already backing toward the door, grabbing his jacket. "I'm not part of this," he said quickly. "I didn't know. I want nothing to do with it." Lucía spun toward him. "Don't you dare walk out on me now," but he was already gone. The silence that followed was deafening. "I loved you," I said. Not blindly, not foolishly, but with everything I had. I gave you a home, a future, a life. And when I was at my weakest, you tried to erase me. Tears welled in her eyes, but I saw no regret, only anger that she hadn't won. "You can't prove everything," she said, voice shaking. "I don't have to," I replied. "I already filed a fraud claim. The sale is frozen. The buyers were notified. The police will follow up. This is over." Lucía stood still, breath heavy. "So what now?" "Now I said you leave. Tonight, or I'll have the police escort you out tomorrow morning." She didn't argue. She packed in silence, filling 3 suitcases and a box of personal items. Not once did she look back at me. Not once did she say she was sorry. And just like that, the woman I thought I'd grow old with walked out the door, not as a wife, not even as an enemy, but as a stranger who chose deception over love. And I finally chose myself. The house was silent after she left. Not peaceful, just emptied, like someone had cracked open the walls and drained all the history from them. I sat at the edge of our old bed that night, not knowing whether to feel victorious or devastated. What do you call it when you win a battle you never asked to fight? The next morning, Alvaro arrived with a locksmith and a technician from the security company. By noon, every lock had been changed, the alarm system upgraded, and surveillance cameras installed on all major access points. This house, my house, was no longer hers to enter. That same afternoon, we submitted the full legal packet to the district attorney's office: documents, video evidence, transaction trails, text messages, and the forged forms. It wasn't just betrayal, it was attempted grand theft identity fraud and criminal impersonation of a legal signer. Lucía had built a web of lies, but we had untangled every strand. Within 72 hours, the police contacted her with an official order to appear for questioning. When she didn't respond, they tracked her down to a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city where she'd been staying alone. Martín had ghosted her completely after our confrontation. According to the detective, she looked shocked when they knocked, like she still didn't believe it had come to this. Charges were filed: attempted property fraud, forgery, and obstruction. She was booked and released pending trial. She tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the evidence spoke louder than any excuse. Meanwhile, I began divorce proceedings. The house was already legally protected under the trust Alvaro and I had set up months ago, and under current laws, any property acquired fraudulently or used in the commission of a crime could be excluded from joint asset division. Her attempt to transfer ownership had backfired spectacularly, giving the court all the justification it needed to deny her any claim to the property. The financial investigator we'd hired also discovered she had funneled money from our joint business account into 2 personal accounts, both of which were frozen during the case. When I told the court that I'd been bedridden at the time, unable to consent to any of those transfers, the judge ordered a full audit. Within weeks, the court ruled in my favor. I retained not only the house, but 90% of our shared assets. Lucía, once so meticulous, so sure of her cleverness, now had nothing but a pending court date and a paper trail she couldn't explain away. As for Martín, it turned out this wasn't his first time being involved in asset relocation schemes. 2 other women came forward with eerily similar stories, one of whom had recorded their conversations. When authorities presented Lucía with that evidence, she flipped, agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. She cooperated fully, but the damage had already been done. She pleaded guilty. Was sentenced to 18 months of conditional prison time plus community service and restitution. Martín, less lucky, received 5 years for orchestrating multiple fraud operations across the region. And me, I went home, to a quiet house with locks that only I had keys to a name that hadn't been stolen, to a life I had rebuilt not out of revenge, but out of the stubborn belief that no one should be erased for trusting too much. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with fireworks, but when it came, it was enough. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't known in years, not silent, not hollow, but calm. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has stripped everything down to what truly matters. There were no more late-night arguments behind closed doors, no more lies cloaked in casual smiles. Just the sound of my own breathing, the rustle of wind through the trees outside the kitchen window, and the slow, steady return of strength to my body. I started walking again, just around the block at first, then farther. I began repairing the back fence myself, board by board, not because I had to, but because it reminded me who I was before the sickness and betrayal. With each nail driven in it, felt like I was putting something back into place, not just the wood, but myself. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. They didn't ask too many questions. They just sat with me, drank coffee, and talked about things that had nothing to do with loss. I started journaling again, then woodworking. A simple bench at first, then a bookshelf. The workshop smelled like purpose again. I wasn't looking for love or for anyone to complete me. I didn't need that. What I needed was space to breathe, to think, to be. And in that space, I found something far more valuable than revenge. I found peace. The kind of peace you only get when you've survived something that should have broken you and didn't. And maybe that's the real victory. Not the court ruling, not the frozen accounts, not even the prison sentence. but the fact that I could look in the mirror again and see a man who didn't let bitterness write his story. When betrayal happens during a period of strength, it feels like a challenge. But when it strikes during your lowest, weakest moments, illness, grief, vulnerability, it becomes something deeper, a form of psychological violence. Lucía didn't just betray a marriage. She exploited Mateo's physical decline, used his trust as a weapon, and tried to erase him from the life they built. As a psychologist who works with victims of relational trauma, I've seen this pattern before. When betrayal coincides with helplessness, the wound cuts twice as deep. But Mateo's response offers something powerful. He didn't react with rage or revenge. He responded with clarity, strategy, and self-respect. He didn't destroy her. He protected himself. And in that, there's a lesson. True strength isn't about striking back. It's about refusing to let betrayal define you. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after someone tried to tear your life apart, you know exactly what Mateo felt. Leave a comment. Justice wins quietly. Let's remind anyone watching that dignity doesn't need to shout it, just needs to endure. And if this story moved, you share it, like it, subscribe. Because there's always someone out there who needs to hear that surviving betrayal is not the end. It's the beginning of taking your life back.